have 18 people. So, whoops, I turned myself off so I'm not listening to me. There we go. California, Chattanooga, Lake Stevens, Whitby, Bellingham, Burien. Well, welcome, welcome. Oxnard to Tacoma. What a trip. That's wonderful. Right. Well, I want to respect everybody's time and all of the effort that Emily has put into this. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining yet another of our presentations today. I'm going to let Emily introduce herself. I'm going to be quiet, and please put your questions into the chat and let's get started.
Okay. Well, first off, hi, everybody. I'm Emily. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to be talking a little bit about year in a day training, both the ones that I do and some little bit of information about what tends to be kind of the normal run-of-the-mill year in a day training. For those of you that don't know me, I am a Seattle area resident. I've been here pretty much my entire life. So those of you from the area may have seen me around. I am an eclectic witch. I've been practicing for over 25 years, some time now. You might recognize my name if you read any of the Llewellyn annuals. I've been writing for those for about 10 or 12 years now. I have a book. I've edited a couple of books. I'm in a bunch of anthologies. So you might have seen my name kind of around the area. I've been participating in Pagan Pride almost every year since it started here in the Seattle area. So that would have been, gosh, probably somewhere in the 2010-ish time frame. So yeah, I've been around. You've probably seen me. If you haven't, that's cool. Right now, I'm most active doing online teaching one-on-one, and I participate in ritual planning and rituals with the Pagan Renewal Seattle group, a very fun group. I personally am an eclectic solitaire. So I'm a witch, but I'm also a curandera. I'm also a muertista, a mambo, and a few other things, because that's what happens when you've been around a long time. You just pick up skills and initiations and things like that. So as I'm going along, I'm going to kind of give you a broad overview of what year in a day training is and what my program looks like. And if anyone has any questions, by all means, ask them at any time via the chat box. I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions you have. I'm more interested in making sure that you guys get the information that you want than anything else. So by all means, don't worry about any of that. And there are no bad questions. Definitely want to make sure that everything gets covered. So to kind of get started with the meat and potatoes, what is year in a day training? You might have heard this phrase kind of around. It's in most of the books that people tend to read. It's something that comes primarily, I believe, from the Wiccan tradition. And it's sort of the gateway to many different magical practices. So it's the term I use because everybody understands it. And basically it's the first year of magical skill training. It's the information that everyone needs to know in order to kind of start their journey on the right foot. Lots of different traditions exist out there that have very specific year in a day training that is how things work in their tradition. It'll often include things like spirituality, pantheons, sabbats, and basic magical skills. The training that I do is solely magical skills. So for those of you that are maybe newer to the practices and paganism in general, Wicca is a specific religion with specific subset of beliefs and practices. Witchcraft is a different thing. Witchcraft is a set of practices that can look really, really different depending on the practitioner, but it's all based on the idea of low magic and things that you do in the magical realm to make your everyday life better. Wicca can have overlap with witchcraft and vice versa, but you can be a Wiccan and not do any witchcraft, and you can be a witch and not be in any way Wiccan. I'm just a witch. I am not a Wiccan at all. So any of the rules, spirituality that you've heard of with Wicca, I don't do. I do a different thing. So that's one of the big differences to be aware of as you hear the term year in a day training bandied around by different people. Every tradition teaches it a little bit differently. It contains different information. For me, it is specifically magical skills. And my goal with my training is after a year and a day, you should be able to walk into any festival, any coven, any group, and have the basic understanding of all of the magical practices to be able to navigate and know what you don't know. One of the hardest things coming into paganism and kind of magical practices is there is so much information out there that you can be completely overloaded by it. There are tens of thousands of books. There are tens of thousands of practitioners, and every single one of us does things a little bit differently. So there are no right answers when it comes to magical practice. There's things that certain people do and things that other people do. It's not necessarily right or wrong, or at least from my perspective. From other perspectives, they believe what they do is the only thing or the correct thing. My personal view is there's the things that are correct for you today, and that can change. One time, you might really be into pendulums and you might be super into it. You might read a bunch of books, you might practice with it for 2 years, and then you might kind of become disenchanted with it and switch over to runes. That's not saying that pendulums aren't still useful or still good. It's just for you, you've moved on. That's how a lot of magical practices tend to be. As we grow as practitioners, certain practices become less interesting to us. Other practices become more interesting to us. It evolves over time, just like we do as people. I wouldn't expect to meet someone 10 years later, have them be the exact same person I met. People change, and so our needs change, and our practices need to change with it. So my goal with my training is to give you the foundations, first to know what you don't know, and then to figure out what works for you and what you want to pursue. So that's kind of the very basics. When I do my training, I do it solely one-on-one. I don't do a lot of group classes. I don't do correspondence classes. I've done both in the past. And they're fine at the beginning, but if you want to make real progress, I find the level of attention you get from one-on-one training to be much more effective. So the way my program works is I have meetings with students once a month, and they're generally about 90 minutes, give or take. The week before a lesson, I will send out an outline. It'll have pre-lesson instructions, the outline of what the lesson's going to contain, and post-lesson tasks. And most of the time, I ask that you spend maybe 20 minutes, half an hour before the lesson, maybe doing a reading, maybe practicing something. But you don't have to do a whole lot to get ready for a lesson. The actual lesson, basically, it's a conversation that we have about whatever the topic is for the day. And then afterwards, you have a series of tasks to complete. Usually it's 3 to 5 tasks, and you can expect it to take roughly 1 to 2 hours a week. I find that's a good balance for all of us being adults that have to live our lives and have jobs and all the different responsibilities we actually have, with doing enough practice to learn something. You'll find a lot of different programs will be very different. A lot of covens will be teaching their specific tradition, and they'll bring in a group of students at a particular time, and everyone will go through the different steps together. If you're working in that kind of group, that's awesome. Personally, what I do is all one-on-one, and it also lets me do a lot of variation in content. So if one student is interested in potion making, and another student is very interested in learning how to make a mojo bag, I can change for each student. I can give the potion student in-depth information on how to do that. And I can have the more crafty person talk more about fabric and sewing and making mojos. I like the flexibility of that. So traditions, as I've mentioned, for those of you that are maybe new and maybe don't know what a tradition is, basically, you can think of magical practice being like flavors of ice cream. They're all ice cream, but they're radically, radically different. Pistachio is not lemon. They're very, very different flavors. And traditions are kind of like that. There's, well, break it down a little bit more. I mean, you've got your big pagan religions. You've got Wicca, you've got witchcraft, you've got Druidry, you've got Santeria, you've got Voodoo. There's all kinds of things under the sun. And all of those have subgroups that have different flavors. Like voodoo, there's Haitian voodoo, there's New Orleans voodoo, there's Puerto Rican voodoo, there's all kinds of Yoruban, different types of voodoo. They're all voodoo, but they're different. Witchcraft is very similar. There's Gardnerian, there's Seax, there's, oh gosh, now there's pretty much an infinite number of different traditions. I'm an eclectic. What that means is that I take from a lot of different traditions. You know, as a witch, my kind of bottom line for things is, does it work? If it works, I'll use it. If it doesn't work, I'll do something else. And that's generally how I teach students. For any given task, there's a series of different techniques. Try them out, see what works for you, see what doesn't work for you. Think about why the things that worked. Think about why the things that didn't work. It allows you to figure out what your strengths are and where your gaps are. So you can decide how you want to move forward and how you want to customize your practice for you, not necessarily what some book thinks you should do or what's worked for somebody else really well. It might not always work for you. So it's really important to try things out, see what your flavor looks like. The other thing that is really different from doing training with me is that I don't bring, and I will answer that question in just a minute, I don't bring my spirituality into your lessons. I am kind of a pantheist and a polytheist. I believe there's lots of different things out there and we should all figure out what works for us. So if you are a druid or, you know, maybe you're a follower of Artemis, maybe you're a muertista, all of those things can work with witchcraft. You can be a witch and have pretty much any spirituality that is compatible with doing magic. There are some spiritualities out there that don't like magic, and you should probably not try to combine them with doing magic. Just kind of the way that works. I will really quickly answer the question that just came up. Do I charge students? I do not charge money. So my lessons are not free. But what I ask instead is that everyone make a community contribution. To do Year in a Day training with me is either making a $75 donation to a registered charity or to do 10 hours of volunteer service work before the beginning of the second lesson. That is the payment I ask for my teaching. Sympathetic magic is part of witchcraft, but it is not the entirety of witchcraft. Witchcraft is a big thing. There's a lot of different moving parts. But you can think of witchcraft is the practice of doing magic, usually low magic, folk magic, but anyone you ask is going to give you a slightly different definition. it's one of those things that is very individual. So hope that answered your questions. And I will come back to kind of the payment thing a little bit later. Okay, going back to my outline. The other thing to be really aware of as you're looking at different teachers and different traditions have different levels of confidentiality in their teachings. There are a lot of different traditions out there that have like a community book of shadows. You've probably heard the terms for that. And those groups will have an established tradition, an established liturgy. Their healing spell might be a specific set of words that is the healing spell that that tradition uses for all healing magics. And that's their thing. And they might say that in order to learn that, you have to take an oath or make a pledge saying that you will not share this information with somebody else. I have had a book of shadows stolen and had someone else claim it as their own work. So different people will have different levels of secrecy for just that reason. Personally, with my teachings, I don't keep them secret because I only give you outlines and then whatever I say verbally. Whatever you write down is yours and you can share it however you want. And you can share my outlines because there's not a lot of content in them. The important thing about it is to know that when someone gives you information, you have to give them credit for that information. You're absolutely welcome to share any teachings that I give, but if it's something that I've given you, I want you to tell whomever you're giving it to that it was mine first and that I taught it to you. It's just like singing a song. Anyone can sing a song, but don't pretend that you wrote it if you didn't. That's kind of how things work. Are we making it up as we go? Yeah, pretty much. There are traditions that have established liturgies. I 100% am making things up as I go because that's how it works best for me. The trick is to know enough of the traditions and frameworks to know how to make it up as you go effectively. So, yes. Expectations. With any training, you get what you give. As I mentioned earlier, I expect students to spend an hour or two a week working on their materials. To understand a little bit better what that looks like with me particularly, I don't have a lot of written assignments where you have to you're never going to write a paper for me because that's not really what witchcraft is about. My assignments are things like go to a park, sit next to a tree. How does it feel? Create a potion, cast a spell, write an incantation. How'd that go for you? Those are what my assignments tend to look like. It might be research something on the internet. Is it interesting to you? Is it not interesting to you? Why? What would you like to know more of? My goal is always to get you thinking. My program requires a lot of independent thought and a lot of critical thinking. If you just want to passively receive information, I am probably not the best teacher for you. I require a high level of interaction. And for me, the best thing that happens with a student is they ask me a question I don't know the answer to. There is nothing better for me than someone coming at information that I've been using for years with a new approach. It is my favorite thing in the world when a student comes up with an idea that I have never heard of before. I want to see critical thinking. I want to see creativity. I want you to ask why. There is nothing that kind of is less rewarding to me than going through a bunch of information and having someone just go, oh yeah, that sounds good. It gives me nothing. I have no idea if you've actually understood what I've said, if you don't ask questions, if you don't engage. So with me, I require a high level of thought and a high level of engagement, which is more than other other things will require of you. I also require that you actually do magic. You cannot successfully complete my year and a day training thinking about magic. You have to actually do it. And you have to actually do it a lot. So yeah. If you don't want to do magic, why bother? So that kind of brings us to boundaries. Something that I have learned with my various students over the years is there's a very important distinction for my boundaries and your boundaries. I don't ever want a student to be put in a position where they can be taken advantage of. Unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous teachers out there. There are a lot of people that are looking for ego boost, money, power, other unpleasant things that nobody with any kind of ethical system wants. So establishing boundaries is very important both for my comfort and for yours and for safety. So one of my very hard rules is during year and a day training, I can't actually be a friend to my student. The power difference is too big. When you have a teacher-student relationship, the teacher has power and influence in a particular way that puts a student at a disadvantage. So I just remove that entirely from the relationship during the year and a day training. I do offer advanced stuff kind of after the year and a day, and that's a different situation because an advanced student should, by that point, have enough of their own foundation and their own power that it's no longer unequal to the point of being problematic. But I take a very hard boundary on kind of not getting involved in people's personal lives while they're an active beginner student. Like I said, it's for my boundaries and for yours. My rules for students are very, very simple. I want everyone to bring their own ethics and morality to their own practice, not necessarily to use mine. That being said, if I think someone is super unethical, I'm not going to keep teaching them. My rules are very, very simple and hopefully not a problem for anybody. First one is just be a decent human being. I call it my don't be a dick rule. I have, due to the outside world and politics, had to add the two specific explicit caveats of this includes don't be a hate monger or a fear monger. That's not productive. And obviously don't steal my work and claim it as your own. That's also not a great plan. Take responsibility for your actions. This is actually fundamental to being successful as a witch. You're going to be doing things. You're going to be casting spells, performing magic. There are consequences to doing this. You must accept them. If you don't accept them, you shouldn't be doing them, and we have nothing to talk about. And the last one is don't practice cultural appropriation. A few months ago, I did a workshop on decolonizing magic. Cultural appropriation is one of my absolute pet peeves, and I get very preachy about it. But yeah, it's very, very important not to steal from other cultures if you're part of an overculture, or, even if you're not. Indigenous peoples, minorities have a right to their own cultures, and there are ways to appreciate Indigenous practices and minority practices that is not appropriation, but it is a very, very fine line. And it's something that I will bring up again and again and again in my lessons as is appropriate. But knowing that if you're gonna say, so I'm a muertista, amongst other things. I work with Santa Muerte. there is a certain established liturgy. There are certain established practices with Santa Muerte. She is a Mexican folk saint. That means you don't put her on an altar next to Freya. I don't care what kind of personal gnosis you've gotten. The cultural liturgy from Mexico says Santa Muerte stands alone, always. So it's very, very important to be very aware of it. And great question that just came up. Very fine line between eclecticism and appropriation. Yes, that is 100% true. The way I tend to approach it, there's kind of for beginners and there's kind of for advanced. As a beginner, you always have another practice you can do. If something is part of a closed tradition, part of a minority tradition, if you don't know enough to know whether or not it's treading the line of appropriation, just choose something else. There are hundreds of amazing European and American overculture examples of magic. I do pop culture magic, amongst other things. There's always something you can do that is not appropriative. If you are not someone who's been initiated into a closed tradition, like for example, Haitian voodoo. In order to be an initiate of Haitian voodoo, you have to go to Haiti and be physically initiated. If you haven't been, one, someone might be lying to you, or maybe you're lying to yourself. You can do practices inspired by closed traditions in certain ways that are still respectful. But it's a very, very fine line. And it's something that I do go over in much, much greater depth with students. I could give and have given entire lectures just on this topic. So I'm going to leave it there if that's okay with you, so we don't get stuck. Because yeah, pet peeve, big soapbox, lots to say. So yeah, I discourage cultural appropriation quite actively. Other things to be really aware of, I have multiple students at any given time. I have a full-time job. I have only so much time I can actually give to each individual student. I have had students in the past that have been a little overly attached. They've wanted a lot of my time, and I just have not had it to give to them. There are teachers out there that will take on students in that almost old medieval apprentice way, where it's like there's the apprentice and the master, and the apprentice like moves in with the master and learns all the things and is almost like an indentured servant to learn the craft from the master. There are teachers out there that work that way. I am not one of them. I have a life. I expect you to have a life. And I find that kind of situation super problematic and prone to abuse. So I don't do that. I wouldn't encourage you to enter into one of those either. It's creepy. Don't trust it. So yeah. Any questions so far about any of that? I'll get into the actual curriculum that I teach specifically in just a few minutes. Okay. So the question already came up about cost. So I do talks and classes on Santa Muerte specifically, and if you want, you can email me later and I'll make sure I put in my email in the chat. Actually, I'll just do that right now. So I just put my email in the chat. We can definitely talk about Santa Muerte later, because I can really go off on Santa Muerte. Different space for that. Okay. Question about, okay, so yes, the year and a day training that I do is kind of non-theistic, in that I'm teaching you techniques. So instead of saying, If you wanted to do a prosperity spell, I'm not going to like give you an incantation that calls on Jupiter or Zeus or Odin specifically, because that's who you call on is your choice, or if you call on anyone. I try to be flexible so that any technique that I give you is something that you can adapt to your own personal belief system. If you're a Hellenistic pagan, you can adapt everything for that pantheon. If you are non-theistic, cool, you can adapt it to something else. I don't have a lot of preconceived notions about what type of practices you will have. It's something that we work on together to make sure that whatever I give you is something that works with the way you work as a human. Kind of confusing, but so yeah. What I teach is not specific to any deities, traditions, belief systems. I have students that are hard polytheists. I have students that are atheistic. I have students that are animist. It's kind of whatever people do. My goal is to give you the tools for you to be successful with your own beliefs, not to teach you mine necessarily. How do I adapt for varying levels without personalizing each curriculum? So that's part of the year and a day thing is my curriculum, and which I'll get to in just a minute. So that's a great segue. My curriculum is what I believe you need to know in order to basically walk into any room in the world, call yourself a witch, and no one can argue with you about it. And so I'm actually pretty rigid about the topics. Within the topics, how they're executed, that's where it is different for each student. So everyone's got to learn correspondences. I have 2 full units on correspondences. The difference being if it's an absolute beginner, it's going to be, what is a correspondence? What does that look like to you? What are some traditional correspondences? If you're someone who's been practicing for a really long time, I might have you research foreign correspondences that are different than yours. I might have you try practicing different correspondences from a different tradition, researching them, comparing and contrasting them. No matter what the topic is, there are levels of depth that go from beginner to adept. Every time I go through this training, teaching someone else, I learn new things about these basic concepts that I didn't think about before. So that's how I kind of personalize these things. That's a great place for me to segue into what my curriculum actually looks like. So mine has 12 units. First one is cosmology and ethics. And that is not my cosmology and ethics. It's what is cosmology? What are ethics? What do yours look like? Second month is metaphysical hygiene. This is the metaphysical equivalent of taking a shower every day and brushing your hair, as opposed to the deep cleans of cleansing techniques. Sacred space and divination is the third month. I have 2 units of correspondences of components. That's all kind of those tables of correspondences, colors, time of the day, time of the year, herbs, stones, oils. I have 2 full months of spell casting that goes from basic spell design through crafting of magical objects. Then there's defensive magic, metaphysical entities, shadow work, cemetery work, and bane magic. That last one is kind of a hot button issue for some people. I will not require anyone to learn bane magic or practice it. And if you don't even want to learn the basics about what it looks like, we can do a different unit. That's where I usually will put in pop culture magic or something else that someone is interested in if they absolutely do not want to learn bane magic. I put it as a fundamental because I think everyone needs to know how hexes and curses work, if only to know how to best defend against them. That's not always something that people agree with, and that's totally fine. I won't require anyone to learn that. So yeah, That's kind of the basics of what I do. A lot of other trainings will include things like Sabbats, will include, you know, the spiritual component to a greater extent, their own kind of lore. I don't, unless someone specifically asks for lore on particular pantheons or traditions, just because, you know, as I've mentioned before, it's more important to me that you learn your version of things than to learn my version of things. If you happen to really like my versions of things, I'm happy to talk about them. They're mine. I'm obviously pretty happy with them, and I like talking about things that make me happy, like most people. So yeah. How am I teaching during the pandemic? Via Zoom. I'm doing everything via Zoom. It is just the safe and prudent thing to do. Normally, I do like to have at least 1 or 2 introductory sessions in person. These days, that's just not prudent. I also work in the healthcare industry. I work for a nonprofit that does tissue transplant. So our requirements for safety and distancing are higher than a lot of other places for pretty obvious reasons. So I don't really leave my house these days. I go to the grocery store. That's about it. So yeah, you do have to be able to work via Zoom or potentially phone. I do sessions once a month. So it's for each lesson, it's once a month, roughly 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the specific topic and how many questions folks have. You can email me at any time, but I don't try to, I don't give out my phone number because I've had people call me a lot. And back to that, I have a life thing and many students. So I do everything via email, and I do all of my lessons via Zoom during the pandemic. Hopefully at some point this pandemic will end and we'll be able to see each other in person once again, in which case I generally meet up with people at coffee shops. And this actually goes back to that whole personal safety thing. We don't know each other. I don't invite people into my home unless I know them pretty well. I know other students do, other teachers do, but I'm just not comfortable with that. I'm also super introverted. So I like some of the distance that happens with meeting online or being in public. How many students do I take per year? I generally don't work with more than 6 students at a time. And that's just the amount of time it actually takes to give everyone the attention they need, and just so that I have life. So right now I do have 5 out of 6 students, but my current crop of students they're coming to the end of their year and a day. So I'm gonna have all of my slots open very soon. I have been blessed with some really, really amazing students this cycle. I do have a waiting list on the off chance that I fill up. The other thing, I only teach adults. I don't teach kids at all. My topics require a level of critical thinking that kids just aren't really capable of. So 18 and over only. That, and I also talk about ethics and dead things that are maybe not appropriate for younger students. There are other places for them. Olateus does some great work with kids, if you're looking for that. Yeah. So are there students that I interview but do not accept? Very rarely. Give some examples. So the way I do all of my trainings, if you want to train with me, I require an introductory session. It's usually about an hour, and it's just for us to get to know one another and figure out if we're compatible. One-on-one really requires there to be a certain kind of level of chemistry and mutual respect. I have had meetings with students where by the end of that meeting, we're like, my particular style of teaching and my particular curriculum is not really what they're looking for. And it's better off for the both of us that we don't continue. I've had one student get through month 2 and decided not to continue after that. I don't require any oaths. I don't require much commitment. If we get a month or 2 in and my approach does not work for you at all, we can part. All the better for it. Lessons learned. I have no problems with that. How does sex figure into my curriculum? It doesn't at all. I don't teach sex magic at all. It's just not part of what I do. If there's particular interest from a student in those topics, I can probably recommend resources, but it's not going to be part of my curriculum at all. Do I find that most of my students complete it? Yes, actually. If you make it to month 3, you're going to make it all the way. Because by month 3, you're doing things that work and you get a reward of seeing things working for you. Yeah. Part of one of the strengths of the one-on-one training is you're utterly accountable for what you do because you have to tell me about it. And if you haven't done it, we're going to have a discussion about why you didn't do it. Was there something about the practice that had a knee-jerk reaction? Were you just too busy? Was there, sometimes you'll come across a practice that just does not work for you. For example, I can't read runes, like at all. Tarot, pendulums, scrying, I Ching, no problems. Runes, can't use them. So if I was doing a practice that required me to read runes, I would come back with, and it didn't work for me. Here's some reasons why maybe it didn't work for me. Let's think about what I can do instead. So yeah, I've definitely had students where it's like, so how'd that doing this one practice every morning for a week work for you? And the response is, it didn't work at all. Here's the problems I had. I'm like, okay, now we know what we need to work on. I expect you to be as human as I expect me to be human. No one is perfect. No one is going to do everything correctly all the time. So yeah, it's my whole goal, like I said, is to help you to figure out what you do best and what you want to do. It's not about creating little mini-me's out in the world. My ultimate goal is to make my community stronger. I want to see badass witches out there actually practicing magic correctly in ways that are actually better for themselves and their environments. I'm one of those people that gets called to clean up the mess when someone opens a portal they can't close. My hope is that none of my students will ever be the person I get a phone call about saying, this person screwed up, you have to come fix it. I want strong, healthy, independent practitioners. So yeah, and that's part of why once you get into months 9, 10, 11, 12, some of the material is a little deeper, a little darker than what you generally get in a year and a day training. And it's because if you don't know these things, you don't know what mistakes to avoid. And as someone who practices for a very, very long time and has made all the mistakes, I truly, truly hope you can avoid the mistakes that I made so that your life can be simpler. Is portal work part of what I teach in the first year? No. No. I do, in both cemetery work and metaphysical entities, do a little bit of talk about spiritual communication. But that is after you learn a lot about setting boundaries and creating wards and things like that. I do not talk about creation of portals, but I will talk a little bit about what to do if you come across one that shouldn't be there. Because that is a little bit more advanced work. In terms of advanced work, for students that, oh, perfect question. Once you complete the Year in a Day program, I am open to doing continued one-on-one instruction in more advanced topics. If it's something that I've got a specialty in, and that means cemetery magic, death magic, curanderismo, pop culture magic, metaphysical entities, defensive magic, that sort of thing, spell casting. Beyond that, it's really, there are things that I'm good at, and I'm happy to share as much information as I can. And if at some point we get to the place where we're teaching each other something, that's amazing. So yeah, there's definitely things that you can do after the Year in a Day with me, if it's something where I have more information to give you. It might be at the end of a Year in a Day, you want to pursue something that isn't something that I'm real good at. At the very least, I should be able to point you at someone who can take you where you want to go. So yeah. Are there any other questions about what I do or what's common out there, things to look out for, anything at all? Because we've got about 12 minutes left. Am I a medium as well? I don't consider myself a medium. I'm a muertista and I'm a death witch, which means that I work with the deep, dark, scary, and I talk to ghosts and entities and things like that, but I don't call myself a medium. And for me, that distinction is when they talk, I can hear them, but I cannot call upon them and guarantee they'll answer me. I generally will only consider someone a medium if they can reach out and initiate contact reliably. I'm generally pretty good, but I don't really rise to the level of a medium. More of what I do is I'll create a relationship with a spirit or an entity and work with them specifically for a long time, which is a different beast than mediumship. Materials. I don't require anyone to buy anything, literally ever, because it's one of my pet peeves. For any of your spell casting work, I will teach you how to do all your spell work with things you have in your kitchen, things you can find walking around your block, stuff you've already got, depending on if you've got hobbies and things like that. Like you can make a poppet out of material and thread, or you can also literally staple or glue pieces of paper together. My goal is not to make you spend money. If you like these things, I can tell you what you can buy for really cool results and really cool potions, but I don't really require anything. I don't require you to buy any books, but I will give recommended resources that if you choose to, you can get at the library, the Seattle Metaphysical Library. I don't know if it's open right now during the pandemic, but they have everything. A lot of things you can get as ebooks, or if you're like me and you're a book hoarder, you can just go to Roberts and buy him out.
So step back for a second, because that's what was my question. Metaphysical Library, which is in Ballard, is an amazing resource. What are some of your others, like the Theosophy Society in Capitol Hill, others that you'd recommend?
Honestly, not. I don't know enough about other public book lending other than the Metaphysical Library and the regular library. Most of what I do in my program is for each topic, I'll have like a list of like 3 books that you can find however you find them. Someone asked me to repeat the elements of my curriculum. It is cosmology and ethics, metaphysical hygiene, sacred space and divination, correspondences and components 1 and 2, spell casting 1 and 2, defensive magic, metaphysical entities, shadow work, cemetery work, and bane magic. All of this I do actually have on my website, which is e-carlin.com that I just typed into the chat. I've got the intro to what my curriculum looks like and what my training looks like, as well as my contact info up there. I'll type my email again so you don't have to scroll up. You're also welcome to find me on Facebook as Emily Carlin. Just shoot me a message so that I know that you're talking to me about this. Because if I just get random friend requests on Facebook, I 100% ignore them. How long have I been devoted to Santa Muerte? About 7 years now, I believe. Yeah. If you subscribe to the Facebook group that is the Seattle Metaphysical and Pagan Events Facebook group, I do Santa Muerte rosaries. Not all the time, but roughly every couple of months. So yeah. So that's pretty much what I've got. Like I said, feel free to email me if you have any questions. It was a joy to come and talk to you all today.
Emily, thank you so much for sharing with us. Today was really a great presentation. We're going to wrap up. I dropped in the chat the rest of the schedule. Please do feel free to enjoy, and please go out, make your intentions known and vote. There's a link to all the voting centers around the United States. If you're outside the United States, please find your local municipality and join us for more sessions today. Blessed be.
Blessed be. Bye, everybody.